Bolsonaro would be the first right-wing president of Brazil since the end of the military dictatorship there in the 80s, and he seems in many ways nostalgic for military rule. Have Brazilians forgotten how it was under the dictatorship?
Yes, I'm just listening. Well, first of all, good evening to everyone. I'm just listening in my neighborhood, people praising, crying and praising dictatorship. So I think there's a certain nostalgia of a feeling of security, of protection that they imagine that has existed during dictatorship. Many people have not even lived this period. The young people in Brazil do not have their own memory of these years. So I think it's really an idealization of a moment in our history where there could have been more security and calmness, when in fact things were very much hidden during dictatorship. So many things that were going on, for example, in terms of corruption, just did not come to the public, to the knowledge of the public.
And Bolsonaro has been dubbed the Trump of the tropics, of course, referring to U.S. President Donald Trump there. Do you think that's a fair comparison? And if so, is it based more on his agenda or on his personality?
Yeah, I think the comparison is actually something that can be made in many senses. For example, I think not valuing the traditional democratic domains that we have to promote political debate, intellectual debate, the debate on principles, defending really the right of people of receiving proper information on what is going on. We do also know that some organizations that have helped Trump to be elected in the United States were also acting in Brazil in this presidential campaign. For example, Steve Bannon, which is a theoretic of communication, and that is very much involved in producing fake news. He was very much present in the Brazilian presidential elections, very much connected to the Bolsonaro family. On the other hand, we have an association in the United States called Atlas that was also connected to some of the movements that have been present ever since the impeachment of President Dilma, and then the building of this whole atmosphere where the democratic institutions will be disconstructed, and the belief that we can reach solutions to our problems within democracy, this has suffered a great attack. And I believe that all these strategies that do come from the right wing in the Americas, maybe elsewhere, they reached Brazil, and they were organized in new institutions, in new NGOs that were somehow orienting the press, that were orienting new political actors that now are coming to power. They have been elected to the Congress. They have now been elected even to the presidency. So the comparison is of course, something that is sustainable. However, of course, Trump does not have this association with the military forces and the idea of a past dictatorship that should again be acknowledged as a good period in the country's history. So, of course, the background, the political background of which Bolsonaro on one hand and Trump on the other hand speak about is not the same.
Hi, it's Doug Herbert here in Paris. There has been a phenomenon in the United States, and I want you to comment on it, whether it applies in Brazil. A lot of Trump's voters and base, they've almost said out loud that no matter what he says or does, they're still going to vote for him. Is there a similar sense in Brazil among some of his electors that what he says, his statements, just don't matter? They are determined to vote for this man no matter what?
Yes, yes, I think this is exactly what is happening among us. So first of all, Bolsonaro did not participate in political debates, just preparing for the elections. Of course, there was this moment where he was attacked, and then he went to the hospital, and he was, of course, prevented of participating in debates. Afterwards, he could have, but he decided not to do so. Even though he was not debating anything, he would make statements, and as you know, very controversial and very violent ones, and people would just not be bothered by that. They would not change their minds. They would not accept conversations. They would not accept arguments. They would just stick to some of the fake news and some of the ideological contents that were being spread. For example, that PT, if elected, would make of Brazil a country similar to Venezuela, this threat of a complete disorder, this threat of a left-wing party that would act in an authoritarian way. And there's nothing to do. There's absolutely no comparison between what is the political project of the Workers' Party in Brazil and what has been the behavior of the Venezuelan governors in the last years. So these were images that have been repeated constantly by the press, by the fake news, and people would just stick to this and not open their minds so to see a little further and how to see that this made absolutely no sense.
Do you think, just one last thing following up on that, do you think his supporters now are going to perhaps end up being disappointed if he doesn't deliver on his promises? Or, once again, similar to what has been seen in the United States, are many of his core supporters willing to continue to support him and blame others for any failures that may come?
Yes, I think he will keep on with the strategy of blaming others. And on the other hand, we do not know what he's going to do because he has not presented clear proposals for economic policies, for cultural policies. He's always attacking someone else. So we don't know what is coming up. What I think will happen is that people will feel frustrated very, very soon. Even in terms of corruption, we don't know what interests are coming now to Brazil and finding the doors open for anything. We do not know really what are the structures behind him. And what I think will happen is that as he is releasing violence, violence will appear everywhere in our society. He also wants to make it easier for people to own a gun. So Brazilian is already a violent society, and if more people have a gun, I think this frustration might come as a result of a growing violence everywhere, on the streets, on the outskirts of big cities, in the countryside, in the forests, there where we have very serious conflicts concerning lands, concerning indigenous reservation, concerning environmental reservations. I believe that an uncontrolled violence will be now a way so to solve in a private way the tensions that we do already face ever since our early history as a nation. So it's really a moment of sadness and of huge concern of how people will really be affected in their everyday life by all that. I think most of the people, of course, for the elites, maybe there are very clear interests involved, but for most of the poor social ranks that voted for him, they just say, we want some change, we want some change. They do not ask themselves in what direction are we now walking. I think there will be a huge frustration and as a consequence, growing levels of violence. Already in the campaign, we have seen scenes that before would be unimaginable in Brazil. For example, yesterday, a young man was killed in Fortaleza, in Ceará, the state of Ceará, when he was taking part in a demonstration in favor of Haddad, of the Workers' Party, and someone just shot and he was killed. We had this capoeira master in Salvador, someone that was very respected by the community. Suddenly there was a discussion on the street concerning politics, and he was murdered as well. We have many other cases of horrible violence that did already take place during the campaign, and now I think people will feel free to go on this way and to solve their problems through strength.
Professor Soares, thank you so much for joining us here on France 24 for this special coverage.